I'm not going to keep this video long. Um, I was disturbed by something that I read, and it has to do with what just happened recently with Putin dropping the ICBM on the missile factory in Petrovsk. Well, the Dnipropetrovsk, I guess is what they call it. Again, you must understand the reason why he did this. As I pointed out before, the objective was to get something across that demonstrated seriousness to the degree where they would realize, okay, he's not bluffing. And for them to stop this continuous escalation. I mean, from the Russian point of view, the continued escalation is going to lead to the point of a nuclear war, meaning you're going to put us in a position where this is going to be the ultimate result. We need you to stop. We need you to accept the fact that you lost. Call it a day. This notion of a unipolar world is over with. We're in a multipolar world. You lost this conflict. Let's end it. They don't want to do that. They are continuously holding on with this idea that Ukraine must be in the Western sphere of influence. And losing in this particular way is apparently unacceptable, even to the point of waging a nuclear conflict, which is where this is leading. So their thought is we need to show a test of strength large enough, or a demonstration of strength large enough to get across that we are serious. All right, they do that. And I'm looking for the response coming out of the West in their appraisal of that, meaning how are you going to take that? Are you going to continuously fire missiles into Russia, an act of war? At this point, an act of war between Russia, the US, and Britain? Or are you going to acknowledge, okay, fair enough, the Russians are serious? I showed the British guy from Sky News and how he wasn't necessarily taking it seriously, wasn't getting that this is not a conversation between us. This is not about rhetoric. This is about us telling you and dictating to you what is happening right now from our point of view. And this is what we're going to do about it in order to remedy that issue. Putin recently just gave a speech, and in that speech made it clear they don't want to give up their hegemony. It's that. And more to the point, we will always respond. That part. And that the entire point of launching that experimental weapon was to demonstrate the capability of Russia. That missile was traveling apparently at Mach 12 and could hit anything, not just in Ukraine, but anything in Europe. Putin even said, we will give you fair warning before we launch it because we know there's nothing you can do about it. All right. The New York Times has an article, this. Trump vows that in the war could leave Ukraine with few options. This article says the darndest things. You read this with a certain degree of astonishment at some of the things they say in the article, meaning that passes for reporting. Let's go into the article. All right. Ukraine has lost this war. It's clear Ukraine has lost this war. And I want to point something else out. Over the course of the last few years, I have been more right on this issue than any of these people. They have been telling you from the very beginning that Ukraine is winning the war, and then they got to the point it's a stalemate. And each instance or each iteration, year after year, I have been getting across to you what has been taking place in real terms, whether or not Russia was struggling, whether they were winning, whether it was any of those things. For the last year and a half, if not longer, Russia's been winning the war. Keep in mind, they invaded with 150,000 people and was able to take 20% territory, despite the fact that they were outnumbered 3-1. At the point where this conflict became even, why did you ever think they had a chance? Also, the numbers that they were given in regards to the number of casualties is absurd. utterly absurd. They are trying to say that only 50,000 Ukrainians died in this conflict. They're out of their mind by like a factor of 10. It's astonishing. The graveyards in Ukraine are littered with the corpses of people that have been killed and died in this war. Even what they considered to be the amount of time frame a person who's thrown on the front line has to live in Ukraine was like measured in days. Ukraine is in a manpower shortage. How did they think they got that shortage? It's just astonishing. Like Bakhmut alone, and the number of people that were dying per day were in the thousands. Like it is, they are lowballing this number to astonishing degree. And it's almost as if they're getting this information straight from Ukraine, where Zelensky is like, yeah, we've only lost 1,000 people, 3,000 people, or 30,000 people. They're out of their minds. Putting that to the side for the moment, these newspapers say the darndest things. So let me see if I can get a better picture of this to make it larger. And just to be clear, I've called this a senseless war. I call it a catastrophe for a reason. NATO expands to the border of Russia. All right, that's provocative. NATO overthrows the government of Ukraine, basically us backing and using a band of Nazis as a battering ram in order to overthrow the democratically elected government, elected by ethnic Russian Ukrainians, or in the ethnic Russian Ukrainians in the East, or Ukrainians in the West. All right. After moving to the border, they overthrow the government of Ukraine, the democratically elected government. Okay, so you put in a vassal patsy government that is completely subservient to U.S. interests and that hates Russians. That is the government you put on the border of Russia. Crimea votes to leave by over 90%. You get the breakaway regions that leave because, again, the democratically elected government has fallen. These people are Nazis and they hate our guts. We declare independence. All right. The Ukrainian government goes on a killing spree, killing 14,000 ethnic Russian Ukrainians. The West pretends like this didn't happen, even though the British media was reporting on it as it was happening. All right. You get Minsk agreements that was supposed to put an end to the conflict. The West ignores it from the jump. Angela Merkel comes out and said, we lied. We had no intention of fulfilling our obligations under this agreement. All right. Putin invades and gets involved in the civil war. Russia launches a special military operation. All right. The West dumps any and everything in their power into that conflict. By the way, this is after the Istanbul agreements, where the West completely blew off and told Ukraine to blow off. Hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians later, here we are in a losing war that even the West at this point, despite calling for the last 3 years that Ukraine was winning, admits now that they are losing and that the Kursk offensive that they launched has been abominable, and the number of people that have been killed. I want you to keep in mind, it is understood that Ukraine has lost this war. And despite that, after losing the election, they decide to escalate to something that Putin said was a red line. In order to demonstrate how red of a line it is, Putin launches a weapon of devastating power. And the people who are in the Biden administration, in messianic delusion, are having conversations about potentially moving nukes into Ukraine to use as a deterrent. These people are going to get us killed. So they're talking about Trump and what Trump is going to do. Then they say this. Some officials in the Biden administration have suggested taking more assertive measures in the remaining 2 months they have to help Ukraine, such as allowing the country to use U.S.-supplied longer-range missiles to strike Russia for the first time. All right, this is something that I pointed out the other day. that within the 2 weeks or 2 months left of the Biden administration, they may try to get more provocative in their actions. And there was a question of whether the reason they were thinking about doing this is because their thinking is that, hey, Trump is coming in. Trump has said he's going to end the war. And so maybe Putin doesn't want to do anything that would be too provocative and assertive, even if we continue to escalate, because Trump may end the conflict. I pointed out that Russia probably will respond forcefully regardless, because there's no way to know, A, what Trump is going to do, and B, if you don't do anything, you can end up with a NATOized Ukraine before Trump ever gets into office, especially if the plans are accelerated. So Russia said it was the red line. They're going to demonstrate the fact that they said it's a red line. I was right. Let's keep going. I want to go further into this article. All right. Secretary Lloyd Austin said Biden administration had approved supplying Ukraine with American anti-personnel mines. All right, fair enough. It says, but Mr. Biden's last-minute steps to give Ukraine weaponry has been requested for years, are unlikely to change much on the battlefield. The White House has said it will allocate the remaining $9 billion in security assistance before Donald Trump takes office. Of that amount, the administration plans to give Ukraine just over $7 billion worth of arms and munitions. All right. So they also acknowledge what we do is not going to change the context of what is happening on the ground. They acknowledge it. All right. So you are saying, in one sense, Biden has decided to escalate at the last minute, even though they acknowledge that nothing they do is going to change what is happening on the battlefield. Now, that is a mind-blowing statement in and of itself. We're going to risk the world, even though we know that doing so won't change anything in real terms on the battlefield at all. Outrageous. Let's keep going. And another shift this month, the Pentagon said it was lifting a ban on U.S. military contractors deploying to Ukraine to help the country's military maintain and repair U.S.-provided weapons systems, particularly the F-16 fighter and Patriot air defenses. But again, they know this is not going to matter. The administration decision to allow Ukrainians to use attack Adams missiles to strike into Russia was a major change in U.S. policy. It came partly in response to Russia's decision to bring North Korean troops into the war. Okay, again, no one has ever demonstrated the North Korean troops being in the war. They may show you a picture of an Asian-looking person. That is not the same thing as North Korean troops fighting on the front lines of the war. This is something that Ukraine said and that they just ran with as if it was a flat fact. Kind of like the way CNN ran with Trump is going to shoot Liz Cheney in the face as if it was a flat fact, despite the fact it didn't happen. Let's keep going. But the escalation risk of allowing Ukraine to strike Russia with U.S.-supplied weaponry has diminished with the election of President Trump. Biden administration's officials believe, calculating that Vladimir Putin of Russia knows he has to wait only 2 months for the new administration. Trump is believed to view Russia more favorably, and his choice for Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has often repeated Kremlin talking points. So, somebody saying we want to end the war is a Kremlin talking point. That is astonishing. More to the point, this calculation that the Biden administration is making that we can escalate and Russia's not going to do anything because Trump is coming into office. I said that was nonsense. And as you see, the ICBM missile launch demonstrates it's nonsense. They didn't see it that way. You trying to get Ukraine closer to NATO before Trump gets in office is not going to work. They didn't accept those terms. Ukraine is losing territory in the east, and its forces in Kursk region in western Russia have been partially pushed back as North Korean troops join the fight. Again, didn't happen. They just made that up. The Ukrainian military is struggling to recruit soldiers and equip the units. The number of soldiers killed in action, about 57,000, is half of Russian losses, but significant for the much smaller country. Again, that is utter astonishment. It seems like they're getting these numbers purely from Ukraine. Ukraine has lost hundreds of thousands of people. They started this military with like 500,000 soldiers, and they've been recruiting over and over and over all the way through. They're out of their minds if they think it's only 57,000 people. But I want to get to this part. So, US and European officials are discussing deterrence as a possible security guarantee for Ukraine, such as stockpiling a conventional arsenal sufficient to strike a punishing blow if Russia violates a ceasefire. Several officials even suggested that Mr. Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the Soviet Union. There would be instant and enormous deterrent. But such a step would be complicated and have serious implications. You think putting nukes in Ukraine would be complicated, and you think it would have serious implications? Ukraine is in a war right now. It is in that war because, for one, it's a patsy nation on the border of Russia that has a massive military that was killing ethnic Russian Ukrainians. And it is a security risk to Russia, as demonstrated by the lethal military that you allowed to build up in that country with all of the weapons and everything else that you provided to them. You honestly believe that Russia, who is saying this is about a neutral Ukraine, full stop. Ukraine is going to be neutral, full stop. And you believe that Russia, who looks at Ukraine as being an existential risk, if it gets into NATO, that they're going to allow you to put nukes in Ukraine? What do you think this war is for? What do you think this war is for? It's such a weird line to write that it would be complicated. No shit, Sherlock, it would be complicated. Complicated is an understatement. And you think that Russia is freaking out now? Oh, you're out of your mind. One of the things that should be made clear with the ICBM launch, if nothing else is made clear, that Russia is in a special military operation, not a war. They have weapons, as demonstrated by that ICBM, that they never use, never broached to use, that they're introducing now, not because they need to, but only to demonstrate a message. Meaning they're fighting this with one arm tied behind their back, and they're still pushing forward and pursuing their objectives. And the speed at which they're accomplishing their objectives, meaning the decapitation of the Ukrainian military, is only increasing. It's astonishing to me that you're writing a line like that. It's complicated and has serious implications. No shit. Talk about understatement of the goddamn year. Serious implications are complicated. It is terrifying to me that the Biden administration, after seeing that, and Putin demonstrating his seriousness, and was very clear, the seriousness will escalate as you proceed with what you're doing in your escalations. And they look at that and say, maybe what we can do is put nukes in Ukraine. That'll stop Putin. They're going to get us all killed. This is a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse that is playing out in real time. And I know when you look back at history, it comes across with a certain gravity. It feels a certain way when you think about it, because you knew and understood the implications of what was taking place as it was happening, because you're looking back on it. Hindsight. I'm saying that is happening now. I'm saying it feels different because you're living through it. But history at some point was a living moment, and those people were living through it. I'm saying we're living through it right now. And we're living through it with leaders that are far more incompetent, far more hubristic, and have far more invested in regards to their own ego and their political future in this, that is contorting good sense from any of them. The notion that you will be in the middle of a war that is a war purely because you decided to knock over the government of Ukraine and using it as a platform to hit and threaten Russia And your thought to that, to Russia's concern about its existence, about its security, your concern is, let's put in nukes. That's your thought. Let's put in nukes. Fuck it. Let's just put in nukes. It's outlandish. It's incompetent. It's insane. It's reckless on a level that is so beyond comprehension. It rivals the existence of the universe itself. These are the people that are giving advice. These are the people that got us into this war in the first place. These are the people that got all of these other people killed. It's their hubris, and it's this waking up in the morning, looking in the mirror and seeing somebody that they think far too much of. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. They have been in their offices. It's air conditioned in the summer. It's heated in the winter. And under no circumstances do they fully comprehend that these countries have been killing and dying for the last 3 years to the tune of hundreds of thousands. They are looking at the world in a fundamentally different way than these kooks in Washington that are advising Joe Biden. They got us into this war, and they would get us all killed if we let them. This is part of the reason that Joe Biden lost in the first place. And they need to get him out of office if he is going to take steps like this to get us all killed. Nate Silver is right. Joe Biden needs to step down. And if he doesn't, Congress needs to act in the best interests of this country. This is outrageous, utterly and completely unhinged from reality. They are doing this for Ukraine in the literal sense and what they are telling people. But what this really does boil down to is just ego and this need to hold on to this hegemonic control of the world that they bet in Ukraine and that they lost in Ukraine and can't accept the fact that they lost. And so they're holding on even to the point of taking the world with it or with them. It's just outrageous. I'm going to end it here. Like I said, I don't want this video to be long. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks all.